What's going on, guys? Gunnar here. I know I'm starting to sound like a broken record on this, but I want to make a really quick discussion on Mark Sedotti's weight balancing flies. And the reason why is because I was reading a new book, which is absolutely fantastic, by the way. It's called Perfecting the Cast. And I'll have a link to this on Amazon if I can find it on Amazon. I'll put a link to it in the description so you can check it out. But this is one of the best fly casting resources I've ever read. And there's a chapter in here, chapter 11, on casting large and heavy flies. And I just want to quote it for a second because I found this very fascinating. You have two extreme ends of the spectrum here, casting heavily weighted flies and casting wind-resistant flies. And Ed here, he's going to go over a casting technique on dealing with both. And the casting technique actually tends to be similar. But he draws a parallel between the two, and I find it very fascinating because the answer is weight balancing flies. So check this out. So we should draw a distinction between heavy flies weighted with wire cone heads, metal beads, or lead eyes, and those which, because they're heavily dressed with hair and feathers, that offer unusual air resistance, like extreme air resistance. The main difference is that the former, the weighted ones, they don't want to stop when they get moving, right? They shoot out past the line. They literally jerk at the end of that sucker. They have a ton of momentum due to their concentrated weight. On the other hand, the later type don't want to go due to their great air resistance. They're literally dragging on the system. They're slowing everything down. Now, it's fascinating. You have one that doesn't want to stop. You have one that doesn't want to go. The difference, one is weighted, one is air resistant. In the middle, you have something that's weighted relative to its resistance. That's Mark Sedotti's weight balance. It doesn't just keep going, and it doesn't slow down. It goes with the fly line. That, in essence, is what weight balancing is. And what you have to understand, and I've said it and I'll say it again, it's relative to air resistance. The weight relative to air resistance, so that it's not on the heavy end of the spectrum because the air resistance slows it down, and it's not on the wind resistant end of the spectrum because the weight makes it more and gives it more momentum. Now, the reason why I wanted to talk about this one last time, I'll probably talk about it forever, like as we just keep going, but anyway, one more time at least this season, is the fact that I kind of worry that you see me discuss this only on extreme examples, like the Sedotti slammer, literally a yak hair slammer. So you see me discuss it while I'm holding a 13-inch fly. And of course, that seems like a very applicable thing to talk about. You got a 14-inch baitfish imitation, and I tell you, weight it, and it helps it cast, right? But you have to understand that it's no different than fly casting a nymph that's weightless or a beadhead nymph, right? One's going to cast really well. One's going to be a little bit clunky. It's not going to want to stop, and it's going to have a little bit of a jerk at the end of that line. It's very simple, but you have to understand it's no different than casting like an Adams, which is fairly weight balanced, versus casting something like a hopper, which has a ton of air resistance. Now, don't misinterpret this. I'm not saying everything needs to be weight balanced, because that's not always the desired result. Sometimes you want it to ride high and dry. Sometimes you want it to get down really quickly, and you can tightline it on the bottom, right? There's different applications outside of casting nuance, but you have to be aware of it so that you, the tyer, because this is something that I think is so cool. If you watch my videos, there's a good chance you're a fly tyer. You make your own lures. Now, what's fascinating in Ed's book, he talks about these extreme ends of the spectrum, weighted and wind resistance, and he comes at it from a casting approach. Okay, this is the technique that you can do to try to overcome those variables and have the best casting performance with those style of flies. But something that you guys have access to, and something I have access to that 85-75% of our industry doesn't, is you guys can fundamentally control the castability of the fly. You're not restricted to what is commercially available to you. You can change it and make it better, right? And that's the whole point of tying flies. You're in the driver's seat. Now, I want to mention this because so far we've dealt with wind-resistant flies, slammers, the mega jerk, and adding weight to bring them into the center of the scale of weight balanced. Mark Sedotti's weight balanced. But there's a whole other end of the spectrum, and it's something that Captain Ian Devlin has shared a whole bunch on Instagram with his jig fly tying, but it's going from a heavy fly and increasing the wind resistance. It's something so cool. I'll add a link to Ian's Instagram handle. You'll have to go down like way far to find it. But basically, if you have a jig like a clouser, tied low profile bucktail, has literally no wind resistance whatsoever, and then like large lead eyes or something, boom, that thing's crazy heavy, right? And it's going to be clunky. But you increase the wind resistance, you can tie a little 3D synthetic fly and get a very similar silhouette out of synthetics, and you have this crinkly waving material that you've built up a slightly taller wing to it, and it's going to have more wind resistance. That's going to balance out the weight that you've used to get the sink rate and the drop weight and fish the depth that you want to fish. So you can take that pattern, bring a heavy fly to the center of the scale, even at like 3 inches, and have a weight balanced fly moving from one end of the spectrum, moving back to the other end of the spectrum, weighted, wind resistant. Middle is Mark Sedotti's weight balance. So I think I've said it before. I'll leave you with this. I would highly recommend a little gram scale. I'll put a link to this also in the description, because these things allow you to tell the difference between medium lead eyes, large lead eyes, a 4 millimeter diameter lead eye, 4.8 millimeter, 3.2 millimeter, going from brass to lead, going from a tungsten cone head to a brass cone head. Seriously, there's an extreme difference in the amount of weight from one thing to the other. And if you're just relying on vagueness to figure it out, you're seriously under disadvantaged. This little sucker, I'll give you an example here, just real quick, because I got 2 lead eyes out on the table. So this is a 4 millimeter lead eye. I already know what it weighs, but of course it's rolling off my little table here. It weighs 0.6 grams, 0.6, 4 millimeter. This is 4.8 millimeter, barely any bigger. It's 1 gram. It's almost twice the weight. It's 1 gram. That's a significant jump. If I was tying a little 3-inch baitfish pattern and I wanted to weight it, that is significant to double the weight in the fly. But if you want a larger eye, you could go to brass. If you wanted to keep, literally, if you wanted to keep the weight of the eye the same, but you wanted a larger diameter pupil, you could change the metal, the density of the metal, to get a wider, lighter weight, and you'd actually know if it was the same or not. So, I want to leave you with that one last discussion on weight balancing flies. Again, probably the best casting resource I've read. Fantastic. And I just thought it was so interesting to see that chapter on casting weighted and wind resistant flies, having them literally draw a parallel between the two, and yet the whole solution is actually right here at the vise and not casting on the water. So I just wanted to share that with you guys. Hope that helps you out. Have a good one.